starting with Dr. Clarence Epstein. In his role as Senior Director of Urban and Cultural Affairs at Concordia University, Clarence is very involved in the day-to-day operations of the university. He's responsible for museum relations, cultural property, built heritage, and urban planning, and he has overseen one of the largest public art programs of any Canadian university. He's also responsible for managing the development of Quartier Concordia, an urban planning project that is transforming the western downtown core of Montreal into a unique university precinct. So yes, he has a big day job. I prefer to think of Clarence, though, as a latter-day monuments man. Kind of a better-looking George Clooney or an even brainier Matt Damon. This is because one of the hats that Clarence wears most proudly is that of director of the Max Stern Art Restitution Project. Clarence will tell you more about the Restitution Project during his remarks, and I don't want to steal his thunder. Suffice it to say that Clarence and his team of experts scour the world looking for artworks that were lost by Max Stern during the Holocaust period. When they find them, they work to secure their return to the Max Stern estate. This work involves determination, patience, and enormous amounts of EQ. Clarence has all of those things in spades. I was first introduced to Clarence in Montreal by my friend Susan MacArthur, who had persuaded me to get involved in a documentary that Susan was developing about Clarence and the Restitution Project. When I met him, he was in full swing, coordinating a ceremony celebrating the return of an artwork to the Max Stern estate. To attend the event, he had assembled a remarkable cast of characters, art dealers, a famous international art hunter who you saw in that trailer, museum curators, university officials, and even Homeland Security. Since that first meeting, Susan and I and our latest collaborators, HLP Productions, have been the storm chasers of the restitution world, racing to the sites of restitution events hosted by Clarence in cities as diverse as Montreal, Berlin, The Hague, and most recently Dusseldorf. Having seen him in action, I can tell you that Canada could not have a better ambassador on the world stage. Clarence's network is vast and varied, and he navigates the challenging issues raised by art restitution with tact and discretion. Clarence will speak for a few moments and then invite Hannah Gartner to join him on the stage. We were so delighted that Hannah was prepared to join us today. Hannah tells me that she got an honors degree from Concordia, but an education from the CBC. For over 3 decades, she traveled the country and the world on behalf of the CBC, delving into the hearts and minds of people from every walk of life and telling their stories. She's climbed a glacier in Austria, investigating the mysterious disappearance of a Canadian hockey player, and she's trekked through Uganda and Kenya, tracking down a bookkeeper who embezzled close to $1 million from children's daycare centers, and she brought him home to face justice. Hannah has grilled everyone from prime ministers to contract killers. She's investigated everything from polygamy to airport security. She's taken on the corrupt and the inept and has explored and exposed that which makes us human and that which makes us inhumane. But she says in the end, all she ever really did was ask questions, the ones you would ask. We look forward to having her do that today. Clarence, over to you. Please take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's truly an honor to be here today. It's not often that a dyed-in-the-wool Montrealer gets to sing "O Canada," except at hockey games against the rival teams. So yesterday, attending another lunch in Montreal held by the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Canada, our university president gave a presentation on the role that Canadian universities can play in the international scene. And in effect, that is an important segue to the work that the Max Stern Restitution Project conducts by virtue of its connection to 2 Canadian universities, McGill and Concordia in Montreal, and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which has a very strong and vibrant arm here in Canada via the Canadian Friends of Hebrew University. And the three universities are heirs to the estate of Dr. Max Stern, the story of which I'm going to reveal in brief this afternoon and explain to you a little bit about how the Restitution project unfolded. So the first person, of course, of interest in any project is our man, Dr. Max Stern. You see the young Max Stern here with his father, Julius Stern. Julius was a merchant in a small town called München-Gladbach in the vicinity of Düsseldorf, wherein he started really in the clothing industry and followed his passion in the arts until eventually investing in an art dealership in Düsseldorf, wherein he moved his family of 3 children, Max and 2 daughters, and his wife. Düsseldorf, in the early 20th century, was a fairly influential center in Germany and in Europe. And a great number of industrialists based in that city were gaining an influence in part by making important acquisitions, including that of works of art, both old master paintings in 19th century and early 20th century German painting. And therein is where the Stern family set up their business. And within that business plan was a vision to educate their children and to eventually have their children, and most specifically Max, who in that age was the defined heir of the estate, and rather of the gallery. The unfortunate death of Julius in 1934 precipitated a much quicker responsibility of the young Max in the dealings of the gallery. Now, 1934, of course, echoes an important period, of course, in German history. And with the rise of the National Socialist government came a number of repercussions that at first were somewhat slow and seemingly benign, but of course became what we know today as the rise of the Third Reich. And therein is where the young Max found himself in 1934-35. By that year, 35, he received his first letter from the Gestapo, or from a wing of them called the Chamber of Fine Arts, wherein he was reminded that as a member of the Jewish faith, he was no longer allowed to practice his trade. Now, this was something quite confusing to German Jews in any profession. And at the beginning, they were trying to find recourse on how to circumvent this kind of edict. And for a number of years, they proposed different solutions on how to manage an art gallery that was owned by Jews. And with every subsequent appeal, they failed, until 1937, where the young Max Stern received the last notice that he had to wind up the gallery, liquidate the remaining assets, and effectively remove himself from the business. And it was at that time that the last act in the gallery Stern took place, which was the forced liquidation of the collection at an auction house in Düsseldorf called Lempertz, a name that I'm going to repeat a few times this afternoon because they remain in business today in Cologne, and they remain a somewhat problematic entity for us and many other claimants of looted art. Now, the story of Max Stern, of course, is one that leads us to Canada, because after Stern left Germany in late 37 with just a suitcase in hand, he first landed in London, where he had tried with his sisters to set up another art gallery business. And for the unfortunate reasons in Germany of being Jewish, it was unfortunate in England for being German. And so, once again, he was forced out of any kind of civilian life and into internment camps. First in Britain, and then eventually to Canada. Canada then, of course, being part of that extended empire, for lack of a better word. They were accommodating internment camps in New Brunswick and in Quebec, where the young Max Stern was placed. Now, that internment camp experience was one, I think, that is not to be really underestimated because there were many Germans who were in these internment camps, both Jewish and non-Jewish, but they faced a similar exile, and many of them chose Canada during the war and after the war to settle and make their home. And it's part of that exodus of Germany that in some ways Canada has been enriched in its immigrant experience. And Max is one of those immigrants. He made his way to Montreal with nothing. He eventually introduced himself to a small gallery called the Dominion Gallery, run by the Millman family, and eventually rose to become the director of that gallery. Not yet the owner. Not yet the owner because he did not have any funds from which to build another business. Those early funds actually came from a source that is quite important and a reflection of how resolved Max Stern was, even right after the war, to try and recover his own belongings. He met a woman who he eventually married, Iris Westerberg, and together they mounted a campaign of publicity to try and recover their works of art lost before the war. You see a picture of them here en route to Europe in pursuit of lost works. That page in his hand is an extract from an art magazine that he had bought an ad in to advertise some of his losses. And so from the mid-1940s, Max Stern was already pursuing restitution. And what is even more compelling, and I think an indication once again that as Canadians we don't always promote our own history and take pride in what we've done, he reached out to a young cultural affairs minister in Canada named Lester Pearson. And so we have correspondence between Lester Pearson and young Max Stern requesting assistance from the Canadian government in pursuit of these losses. Lester Pearson writes letters of introduction for Max Stern to Europe, to various ambassadors based in the European countries of the Alliance, and he writes to the Canadian military representative in Germany at the time in the hope that the military can assist Max Stern. And so our own monument story has yet to be told about the role that Canada played in the post-war efforts in recovering looted art, because some of the monies that were acquired by Max Stern to eventually buy the Dominion Gallery came from the paintings recovered with the assistance of the Canadian military to him and Iris. That is part of a long story that has quite a wide gap in between, because in the years where Max attempted to recover works, which was a fairly limited period, there were all kinds of statutes and decisions taken by the European and American alliances and the German government insofar as making restitution claims. And so at a certain point, Max turned his life around and built a gallery like no other in Canada, the Dominion Gallery. And here you have Max, towards the end of his life, kind of presenting himself with what were his children, because he had no children. And when he passed away in 1987, he left the bulk of his estate to 3 universities, Concordia, McGill, and Hebrew University, which are in effect acting like his children in pursuit of his rightful belongings. And in that regard, that's where the story jumps from the mid-40s, when Max was pursuing claims on his own behalf, to the late 90s, when Concordia University became involved in the management of his estate. His estate was a vast estate. He was a very, very wealthy man when he passed away. He had also left over more than 5,000 paintings in the Dominion Gallery inventory, as well as an important private collection that he left to museums across North America and Israel. And in the process of managing that estate, we were taken back by the amount of work and the amount of information that was available to us in the archives that Max Stern left. And what happened effectively is, in the same way the universities were responsible in liquidating the Dominion Gallery collections for the purposes of winding up that business, we found out that there was another business that had been operating that none of us had known about, which was the Gallery Stern. And we uncovered this catalog, which was a catalog of the sale at Lempertz in 1937 of the final remnants of the Gallery Stern. And from there, forensically, we built an argument around what was 3 imperatives that the universities shared. We had a fiduciary obligation as his heirs, we had a moral obligation, and we had an educational obligation. And those three together formed what has become the Max Stern Art Restitution Project, at a time which was quite pivotal, because 1998 was the year that the Washington Principles were signed, which was a gathering of 44 countries in Washington that agreed to find fair and just solutions in relations to lost works, such as those of art during and before the war. Now, for three universities to manage this, we have to rely on our strengths. We weren't going to start following legal procedures that didn't exist. We weren't going to start advertising losses like the young Max did, because those were no longer vehicles that were opportune or feasible at the time for three universities. What we did is we lent on what for us is our strength, which is research and education. And we proposed to the executors of the estate a vision wherein we would create an exhibition. And that exhibition, we had hoped, we weren't sure yet at the time, would travel the world. And that within that exhibition, designed and curated by one of our professors, Catherine McKenzie at Concordia University, we created what we believed was a ghost exhibition. An exhibition of works that no longer were known their last whereabouts, that were unclear to us of who might be holding them or possessing them, as we called. And in effect, we were trying to use this as a platform for information gathering. This became one of the hallmarks of the project in terms of combining research, education, and transparency in objectives that are not very common in the art world. That is not the way the art world functions on a day-to-day basis. And through this exhibition, we were breaking new ground. What happened, in effect, though, was that we reached out to partners that we had worked with on other major estates of other collections. And therein were the auction houses in Canada and internationally, such as Waddington's in Toronto, and of course Christie's and Sotheby's, who had and have representation in Canada, but are completely intertwined in the art world network internationally. And just on the eve that this exhibition was about to open in Montreal, wherein we had no paintings, we only had ghosts, we had reproductions, we got a call from from Sotheby's. I'll bring Christie's in very shortly, wherein they had uncovered, in a very timely and opportune moment, a painting that belonged to the estate, and that was in that famous forced Lempert sale. And through quite quick resolution, Sotheby's returned the painting back to us unconditionally. And you see the painting in front, in color, the first painting that was returned to the estate, which was a work by a 19th century romantic artist named Horace Vernet-Lecomte. And this became the first painting that we never thought we would ever get. We never believed that we had any chance because we weren't quite sure how deep the well was and how precarious it was going to be to recover things. Well, the exhibition became the guide for us in the process of developing a restitution project that was based primarily on research and education. And so the exhibition traveled from Montreal to New York and was exhibited at the Leo Baeck Institute. And just in time for the opening of the Ghost exhibition at the Leo Baeck Institute, we got a contact from a foundation based in Spain. We had done some research and had discovered that this small foundation in Mallorca, named the Jacober Foundation, had a collection of childhood portraiture and adolescent portraiture, of which this painting by Nicolas Neuchâtel, the portrait of Jan van Eversdyke, was now in. And this was Lempert's painting. What happened at that point is when we reached out to the foundation, it turned out that Mr. Jacober was the son of Holocaust survivors. And he immediately recognized the issue at hand and also unconditionally returned this painting in time for the opening of the exhibition in New York. So you can imagine what is starting to happen now for us. We are starting to understand the power of educating and the power of promoting towards the power of finding people who share in doing the right thing. And so the exhibition traveled. It went to London. It became part of an exhibition series for the Ben-Uri Gallery, which is the London Jewish Museum of Art. And as good timing would have it, our good friends at Christie's gave us a call. and advised us that this work was a work that they had caught and that had a problematic ownership history connected to the gallery stern. And Christie's, similar to what Sotheby's had done before in Montreal, returned this work in time for the first European leg of the exhibition, and most importantly, a breakthrough for us because most of these paintings are circulating on the continent or in the markets in London and New York. So this work by Jan de Vos was unveiled in time for the opening of the exhibition in London. So we were starting to get used to this formula of opening an exhibition in a city and eventually getting a painting back. But I don't think there were going to be enough cities interested in our timetable as much as there were paintings that were needed to be recovered, more than 400, as you've heard earlier. But what happened was that we started a relationship with the auction houses and with the art trade that was symbiotic, because the auction houses and the rest of the art trade are quite dependent on both their reputational exposure as well as the conflict of having a painting that does not have a clear rightful heir in modern legal circumstances. And so working with them has been a very important step in sharing information as well as learning about the whereabouts of paintings that we would otherwise not know about because the complications of sharing information in the art world. What happened was, while the exhibition was touring in London, it eventually made its way to Israel. And we organized a very large conference in Israel with the assistance of the Hebrew University and the Israel Museum, both of which were heirs of the estate as well, and started promoting a number of the larger issues related to restitution, not only in connection with the Stern Project, but in connection with other families and other individuals who were being forced in the same way to deal with a very limited set of information bits and a very large and precarious art world. And so what happened was we took that conference model and we understood that there was a conference going on in Berlin, not one that we could control because it was being supported by the German government. And with the assistance of Christie's once again, we were able to secure the recovery of another painting, this a work by the Circle of Jan Wellens de Kock, Flight into Egypt, that we unveiled on the eve of an important conference in Germany that was addressing the role that German museums and German art institutions had in dealing with this issue. And we took a position. And that position, by that time, having already achieved a certain amount of success in the exhibition circuit of the work that was done by Concordia, the exhibition was called Auction 392, Reclaiming the Gallery Stern Düsseldorf. That term reclaiming was a very loaded one, especially in Germany, where the Germans were in somewhat a state of denial about this being still an issue, still a hangover from the war. And the next morning, the German Minister of Culture recognized the press conference that we had the day before and made reference to the work that we were doing. And for us, this was an important coup, because Europe was not the only focus. It was truly what we were going to be doing in German-speaking countries, since so many of these paintings that had circulated in the Düsseldorf scene were paintings that were circulating in areas like Holland, in areas like Germany, in areas like Austria. And so with that recovery, we had an important statement to make in Germany, but we didn't yet have relations with the Germans. And this was something that takes many years, and we have to thank in many regards the role of our government in Canada here for facilitating introductions to the universities of diplomatic officials overseas. Now, what happened concurrently with this is that we discovered another painting that was going up for sale in Rhode Island, in a very small, unknown auction house. And this painting was extremely problematic. Problematic, one, because it had a direct link with the gallery Stern in those most difficult years, but that the possessor of the work, who had consigned it to the auction, also decided to post all the paperwork in connection with the painting and showed the proof of sale from the Lempertz auction that her stepfather had bought it in. And we immediately raised red flags because this was in the United States. This was a jurisdiction that we hoped would understand the problems and the complexities. And we went to appeal to this possessor owner, who turned out to be a German baroness who had left Germany just after the war to make a new life in the United States. And at first we thought she was somewhat sympathetic to our cause, until she decided, without any legal advice, to ship this painting back to Germany in the hope of removing it from US jurisdiction and not making any declaration. And at that point, we had to take legal action. And through that legal action, a number of important steps and a turning point in the project took place in those years. What you have to understand was this was the poster child of the Lempertz sale. This was the piece that was drawing the attention of all those buyers who were going to come and pick up discounts at a Jew sale in Germany just on the eve of the war. And in effect, the role that the estate took in supporting with the universities a legal action against the Baroness in the United States was pivotal. In effect, what happened is that we went to the First Circuit of the Federal Court of the United States, and after several years' arguments, we won our case. Not only did we win our case, the Baroness appealed, and she lost the appeal. So the decision by the United States government, in effect, to render this painting back to the heirs of the estate, the three universities, was critical. Our arguments were what we believe to be solid. This is a work, an image of the painting in the Baron's castle during that period, right after the Lempertz sale. He effectively took this work and gave it a pride of place. When the story broke internationally with regard to the court actions and the winnings, this was a turning point for us because not only were we on the international stage by virtue of the decision, but we were also coming into the alliance of the United States government, because by virtue of this decision, all works that were from that for sale are deemed to be stolen by the United States government. And therefore, the Department of Homeland Security calls us now when they catch paintings. We don't call them anymore because they are acting on a decision and not acting on a request. This is an ironic picture, and I show it to you now very quickly, because when the story broke and started appearing in all the international art magazines, well, look who bought the ad next to the story. It was uncanny. Lempertz does not recognize, and still does not recognize, the bona fide right that the universities have in pursuing these claims. And it is a problem that we still face today, and we're not sure how Lempertz is going to move forward in this universally agreed problematic issue. Just after the Winterhalter was recovered, the United States government started sending out their immigration and custom enforcement officers undercover to the art markets, to the art fairs. They do that regularly when there are looted works that are in circulation. And in this case, this piece that was at Maastricht at the time was seized by the Department of Homeland Security by two undercover officers and returned back to the estate. The story made the headlines again in the United States. All the major media outlets in the United States covered it, including the New York Times. And with that New York Times article, other art dealers started recognizing this connection between Max Stern and the Gallery Stern. And within 2 weeks of recovering the work of the bagpiper, we recovered this work by Lodovico Carracci, an important Italian old master painter that was in the collection of one of the great old master dealers, Richard Feigen, who called me at my office and basically asked me for my address so that he could send this painting back unconditionally. Well, this was the start of an important movement for us in terms of having a North American recognition of what we all believed was the right thing to do. But getting the Europeans to believe that is another story, and something that for us is an ongoing challenge. The first place we were successful in doing it was in Holland, where in this painting, a work by Jan Bruegel the Elder was on display at the Noord-Brabants Museum, one of the state museums, and was on a list of paintings that the government of Holland had published that were considered problematic. And we argued our case in front of the Restitution Committee in the Netherlands, and we won the return of this work, which is an important coup in having a European government, like we had a North American government, recognize the rightful claims of the estate. That created a little bit of a momentum that was supported by the large auction houses that remain close to us and work with us regularly in support of the issue of restitution. A work by Jurjen Pol, a 17th century Dutch painter, was uncovered by Sotheby's. And as it turns out, this work was with a German casino. It was, and you can imagine, with a title like the Master of the Goldsmiths Guild, was very appropriate for a casino in Germany to display as a sign of kind of wealth and taste. This painting was eventually recovered to us and was the first time that a German entity had acknowledged the estate's right to claim. Soon after that, the field started opening in Germany. We reached out to the Stuttgart Museum, wherein we found this painting, and we presented an argument that was very similar to the argument of the Bruegel painting. However, the Stuttgart Museum found that our research was not yet conclusive or definitive. And within 2 years of this painstaking work, which is done by an incredible group of researchers based in Washington, Ottawa, New York, and London that work as part of the restitution team, we uncovered a paper trail wherein this work was proven to be used as extortion by the storage company that was holding this painting for Stern during the war as payment in lieu of rent. And that payment in lieu of rent, Max had to secure in order to purchase an exit visa for his mother from Germany just before World War II. And by proving that, the Stuttgart Museum returned the work and agreed that this was clearly a non-issue. Well, the success of that begot as well connections with the Canadian government, because in the same year that that piece was recovered, Canada was the chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and wanted to take it upon themselves to make a mark internationally that year in Holocaust remembrance activities. And so at a ceremony at the embassy in Berlin, the Canadian embassy, Minister Kenney came personally to unveil the work and announce Canada's commitment to the issue of restitution, a commitment that continues now with the Canadian Art Museum Directors Organization that is now working on case studies of research of Canadian museum collections in the hope of clearing any taint from any of our museums. Soon after that, the Stuttgart painting, which was a work attributed to the Master of Flamel, another work by an important German 19th century realist was uncovered at an auction house that was the competitor of Lempert's, an auction house that had given us problems in the past, but that had agreed to return this work back to us. And with the return of this work, the Canadian Embassy in Berlin shipped the painting, as they did the Stuttgart painting, to Berlin, and we had an important return ceremony with a number of officials from northern Germany. Northern Germany is where the heart of our issue is, because that's where the paintings are circulating. And in northern Germany, we have now come full circle from the young Max Stern and his issues as a young Dusseldorf gallery owner to the city of Dusseldorf itself, which is really back to the scene of the crime. And in Dusseldorf, we have now developed an important set of relationships with the government of Dusseldorf and with their museums, wherein we are finding a number of problematic works in the museums. The first one that was returned is this important self-portrait of one of the pioneer artists of Dusseldorf, Chadeau. Chadeau was the director of the Dusseldorf Academy. The Dusseldorf Academy was the greatest academy of art in the early 19th century in Europe. And the fact that the Dusseldorf Museum returned this work and acknowledged it, a work that is a great pride of place in their city, was an acknowledgement that this pride of place was put in question by the taint of the painting and its history. The recovery of that painting less than 2 months ago was held in Dusseldorf in the presence of Dusseldorf officials as well as our Canadian ambassador, who made the trip as well to Berlin and had taken a vested interest over the year in looking at this link between Canada, the Holocaust Alliance, and the activities of 2 Canadian universities out of 3 that are committed to such a cause. So in effect, we're looking at an important network of members of the art trade, of members of the Canadian Diplomatic Corps, of other European countries, of law enforcement, of universities, of researchers that are coming together in the most unusual way to work towards a common end. And that common end is one where 10 years ago, we had never believed we were going to get one painting back. We are now up to 12. We have hundreds more to pursue. We are one cause out of many, many causes that has not yet been heard in terms of recovering works of art that were looted by families and individuals before and during the war. And anything that we can do to share and to assist in that cause is one which we hope will create international reverberations for our universities and for our country. So Hannah, I'd like to invite you to come up and so that we can expand a little bit about this issue.
Is this a movie or what? First of all, I thank you very much. I'm honored to have been invited to ask the sorts of questions that I'm curious about, because this is one case and you can extrapolate. And while you're working on the side of the angels and for right and for justice, you go up and down a lot of murky paths to get there. I think this is a 007. You know, it's how we got one painting, we had an exhibit, we had a conference, and the paintings came. Right. Yeah, there's a whole other movie. But what I'm very curious about, because since I've become fascinated about this and I have done some limited reading, I'm understanding the complexity of all of this. It's history and morality and law, and what I'm curious about is what made you decide, that last painting in Dusseldorf, what made you decide to leave it on the wall of that museum in Dusseldorf on loan? Most people, they get their property back, they want to go home, put it in a suitcase, and bring it home.
Right, it's part of a strategy. And of course, the whole Stern project is one built on a strategic plan. A strategic plan that evolves, but with stakeholders like museums, what you want to do is you want the issue to resonate. And it cannot resonate in Canada as much as it can resonate in Germany when the scene of the crime remains Germany. And leaving the painting on loan in Dusseldorf was important for the museum director because that piece is one of her signature pieces in her collection. But also, it allowed her the opportunity to approach her mayor and present to her mayor a plan that if the estate had agreed to keep this painting on loan, her museum would organize a major retrospective on Max Stern, which is happening in 2018 in Dusseldorf. And often we have to look at the pluses and not the minuses when we are recovering paintings.
But this is, am I right to say, uncommon?
For us, it's been something that we've decided in the last few years as being strategic. More often than not, it's not institutions that recover paintings, it's individuals. And they have the right to sell that painting whenever they want and to realize the gains that their ancestors did not realize.
And in fact, that has been the case. When ownership is established, it goes from museum to auction. And there have been arguments made. In the end, doesn't that just serve in feeding the art market and starving the public?
Well, I mean, the paintings are still available for research. They perhaps are not going to all sit in museums, but an artist did not paint a painting for it to sit in a museum. An artist painted a painting in the pursuit of their passion. The way that collectors and markets and museums and anybody who would like to acquire something goes, these works are free to circulate. Very often they land in museums and don't necessarily find their way anywhere else and don't even get exhibited sometimes. We know that perhaps 1% of a museum's collection is on display at any given time. So the fact that these works might circulate in private collections or be sold by individuals is something that is very normal in the art world, and it shouldn't be shunned upon, but it is when we have the opportunity to share the work with the public for a greater good than just the work itself, that's when you have an interesting...
You alluded to the fact that some 44 countries signed this agreement in '98, and there was another one in 2009?
Right, in Terezin.
Pledging that there would be a resolution to all of these claims. Why have these international agreements been so spectacularly unsuccessful?
So, in as much as a government would sign these principles, they cannot enforce them legally. Each country has their own set of laws, and within those set of laws, there are separate issues related to stolen property.
I'm not a cynic, I am a skeptic. Why would they all rush to sign this thing then if they couldn't do anything about it?
Because they're principles and they're not signing laws. And so it's a step forward to sign principles in the hope that you're going to bring those principles back to your country and develop them into the rewriting of law.
So, why was there a silence in the firmament?
So right now, what we're seeing is gradual recognition, and it takes years by these governments. We can't expect them to turn this around in a year or 2 years.
This is why this man is so good. He's such a diplomat. They would throw me out immediately.
Well, I mean, I wish I could cast aspersions, but the truth is that these issues take time. And Holland is one of the countries that is the quickest to have turned around their policies, created a restitutions committee, and helped the government advance this.
So, and why now? Is it a coincidence that suddenly we seem to be hearing and reading about all this restitution, the Max Stern project, the Cornelius Garlett in over 1,400 paintings?
I don't think it's a coincidence, but I think that the stars are aligned, and that is what is really important in regard to this issue. This Garlett hoard that was uncovered just over 6 months ago is one that has broken the back on the issue in Germany. In the past, you had individual claims that the German government did not get involved in because they were trying to distance themselves from the issue by saying, you have an issue in Germany with a museum, or with one of our art commercial businesses. And as a result, you need to resolve it independently. This one was beyond any one decision. This one came out of a German government's ignorance to the fact that this many paintings were not in circulation, that were believed to have either been destroyed or had never been hoarded by one individual like Garlett had hoarded them.
But this had to be a very large secret shared by a great many people in the know. The art world is a pretty closed entity.
True.
So how is it that all these people were able to sit on this for so long, so well?
Well, there probably were people that knew about this collection in some way, or knew about the Garlett family and the fact that they had works.
Because there was self-interest in that pool of people.
Precisely, and Garlett himself, the son, sold paintings slowly to subsidize his life. And as a result of selling those paintings, there were certain dealers that we had heard both in Switzerland and Austria that had sold works. And in Cologne, Lempertz was known to have sold a work that Garlett's son had consigned to them.
I applaud the honor of seeking justice and doing the right thing. But then you start to think, should all looted art be returned?
Big question, and a question that at a university is one that is of great interest to the academics. We recently hosted a conference in November called Plundered Cultures, where we took 3 case studies, Germany during the war, Armenia, and the Aboriginal experience in Canada. And we looked at them comparatively to see what overlap there was and what issues were shared. And this issue of injustice remains continual, but sometimes history, sometimes politics, sometimes life gets in the way of these matters. And so bringing them out academically is the first step towards getting some kind of critical path together in the form of injustice on a much more macro scale, as you're suggesting.
But because when you start thinking about the practicality, I mean, should there not be some statute of limitations? Because when you start parceling out and thinking of, well, who owns what that's in all of these museums, natural history, art museums all over the world, we could empty them all out. We could empty out the British National museum.
Absolutely, and I think this is a crisis that is going to have to be managed. There are works, and we know
Because it was called the spoils of war, right?
Precisely,
Looting.
right. And you see that now between Russia and Germany. Germany does not recognize the claims that Russia makes on anything looted because they say it's quid pro quo. We went to war together, our losses are our losses, your losses are your losses, and we beg to differ on any claims. And so that is a problem, but one that the museums are going to be facing because they're going to have to own up to the ownership history of every object in their collection. Sometimes it will be impossible for anyone to prove it, but in some cases there will be trails that might have been somewhat suppressed in the files.
But this sounds like a new concept. Isn't investigating the provenance of these pieces of art part of the responsibility of a museum? Like,
Yes.
Where does this thing come from?
Well, it comes out of a set of, I guess, misguided traditions that are very typical in the art world, where the control of information and the control of transparency gives you power. And museums have and need that same control of information and power to compete against other museums and to compete against other researchers who they don't want to share that information with because they want to publish it, they want to present it.
But then I also think of the other side of this whole issue, and that would be the good faith buyer. Somebody actually buys a piece of art in good faith, and somebody knocks on the door and says, no, it's mine. Is that justice, that they just have to fork it over?
It's not, and it's a problem that the estate faces regularly on paintings wherein an auction house has it consigned by a collector who is 7 or 8 degrees separated from the original for sale in the 30s. And we acknowledge that, and we try and find ways to work it out. Because in the end, there is a black mark on this painting, a black mark that we cannot lift as an estate because the work is believed to be ours, but a work that remains rightfully theirs by virtue of the laws of their country. And as a result of that, neither of us can actually make a move without both of us agreeing to what that move is.
You know, we think of art in the art world, we put it on a pedestal. But it sounds as if this can get really down and dirty.
I think it probably is dirty in many cases that we don't hear about it. You don't get presentations really on failed attempts to negotiate and on issues that remain in negotiation, because negotiations are very sensitive. And if you try and air your dirty laundry during a negotiation, it can hurt you. And so you have to be careful. And so sometimes people believe that no matter how failed they are in a current step in their approach, that they'll have success later. And if they try and air their laundry now, they might compromise their chances of having that success later.
And human nature being what it is, if you own something for 65, 70 years, who thinks of provenance? It's yours because you've had it that long. How common is it for museums generally to hide Nazi-era artworks with just confusing and misleading provenance, to actively try to keep this art lost?
Well, I would hate to think that it's intentional, but I imagine through broken telephone, through years of acquiring it at a certain point which was problematic, and then forgetting that that was a problematic period, and then curators inheriting that collection, these things are ignored. And what's happening now and what the Canadian government...
But you said it's not intentional, but that's willful.
It might be willful, so without pointing the finger at one curator, one can only imagine that a curator would hate to have to release one of their treasured objects if they didn't have to. And so because the burden of proof is on the claimant, sometimes we do not always get the information that the museum has on file in a very straightforward and direct way.
So, well, then to what degree are museums, not just in Europe, but in North America too, because there have been issues here,
Yes.
complicit in sort of a willful collective forgetting, because it's cost effective to do that?
Well, we've recently seen with the Museum of Modern Art a challenge on their collections, and particularly works looted during the Holocaust period. And a great turnaround, if you haven't seen the movie The Portrait of Wally and the recovery of the Egon Schiele painting, wherein the Museum of Modern Art is questioned in its intentions and its genuineness in wanting to resolve a wrongful issue, that very often, as Morley Safer has called them, directors are often the butlers of their board. And that is sometimes something that has to be dealt with at a political level.
And it's something that has confused me, and I haven't figured out why it is there has been such a resounding silence, even of Jewish museums, not to come forward and seek the same sort of justice as vocally as you are. I don't get that.
Well, a museum is a museum, not necessarily because it has a Zionistic mandate that it will have a different role to play as a museum. And within Israel, there are problematic works in collections that are dealt with in the same way they're dealt with in other museums in any other part of the world. So you're looking at a kind of entity, which is the museum, wherever it is, and the problems that museums face right now in having to revisit their policies and revisit what is, in effect, a tradition that has to change.
The road to fairness and justice is obviously not an easy one. This is a bumpy ride. I'm sure you have stories that I wish we had
Absolutely.
time for.
And to be continued.
We'll take the action.
Sounds like a great way to end.
I thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome MJ Perry to thank our guests.
I am honored to give thanks, and I have so many reasons to. I got to meet both a scholar and a journalist that I really respect and admire, so thank you both very much. Thank you for the stories and the history that you have given to us, the mystery, enlivening art again, and the tragedy and the hope that is still there, and you have emphasized that hope so well. Thank you also for choosing our podium to share this information. It's a story so many people don't know still, despite George Clooney. A lot of people don't know, and it needs to be heard. And thank you very much for coming and sharing with us.
Thanks, MJ. As a token of our appreciation, on behalf of the Empire Club, I'd like to present you with a copy of Who Said That? It's a selection of quotes and notes from 100 years of the Empire Club speeches.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'd like to extend a few final thanks before you all head on your way. First, thank you to our generous sponsors. AMIO is our travel sponsor, and the Art Canada Institute and the Azrieli Foundation sponsored our student tables. So thank you. I'd like to thank the many organizations who helped us out today by providing promotional support. Concordia, Canadian Friends of Hebrew University, McGill, the Trudeau Foundation, Beth Sedek, and Partners in Art. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor and Van Valkenburg for providing our AV. This meeting will be carried and aired on Rogers TV. We're very grateful to them for their ongoing support. We're now on Twitter and Facebook, as well as online at www.empireclub.org. Thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you again soon. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.